we had the benefit of the doubt from the consumer base. But now it's a totally different landscape. It's insanely competitive. Everyone's breeding, everyone's crossing. There's amazing genetics all over the place. But it's what do you do with them? How do you pick them out? And then how do you think about the next evolution of what the market might want?
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields. With me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we got a very special guest, Caleb Counts of Connected Cannabis. Caleb, thanks for taking the time. How you doing today?
I'm excellent, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Excited to have you here. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Really excited to talk to Caleb and dive into West Coast cannabis. And I think that kind of speaks in terms of his loyalty, West versus East Coast. I know there is some bleeding of West Coast brands into East Coast that we're going to talk about, but we'll leave that for later in the conversation. How are you doing, Brian?
Yeah, I'm stoked. I think there's a lot of information that we're going to learn today, maybe some history we can quickly touch on, and then dive into some of the fun aspects that's connected to, and that probably a lot of other brands are chasing to figure out how they can associate themselves in that same upper tier that Connected has. So, Caleb, quickly, can we get a little background about yourself and then just Connected?
Yeah, so born and raised California, sold my first bag of weed when I was 12 and really didn't stop all the way through college until, I took a job in another industry in real estate to see what legitimate money looks like back then. That was 2003, fresh out of college. Did that for 5 years after the market crashed. I saw an opportunity to get into the legal cannabis market. And after going into my first dispensary in Sacramento, seeing what all the ways to not run a business, but they were still cranking through patients. I call them patients because it was medical at that time. Within 6 months of that first experience in Sacramento, I opened up my first shop in Sacramento, Fruit Ridge Health and Wellness Collective.
I love it. So we'll just dive quickly through some of the history, and then we'll kind of come to the current. Cookies, Berner, and Biscotti. Can you take us quickly how that relationship started, and then to Biscotti and how that kind of came to be?
So it was late 2013. Me and my partners were at a High Times in San Bernardino, and Berner had a booth at the back of one of the smaller booths at the back of the High Times event. And my partner is like, "Hey, let's go talk to him. Let's see what's up. See if he'd be willing to, license the name Cookies." And Berner was like, "Let's crack it off." And the first day we called Berner made a post online. Our sales doubled, and our sales essentially doubled close enough for the next 17 days. And it was insane, just boom, boom, boom. And we went from what was decent revenue at the time to unbelievable traffic through our doors. So it was at that time we truly realized the power of branding flower, because there wasn't a lot of branded flower. There was hardly any at that time. And that's really where the magic began. Fast forward through that relationship, after Berner connected us with the creators of Girl Scout cookies and then Sunset Sherbet and the gelatos, licensed those. But working through those and seeing that success, we realized we're fully emerged in what we would refer to as like a hype market. And when you're hype, you got to have that next hype thing. And so we embarked on our first breeding mission. We went through the breeding process with gelato and some other various crosses or genetics to cross with. And out came RC 14, 25, 27, and 28. And what is RC code for? Red cup, because that's how, you used to plant seeds. And so, nothing too crazy there. And so we realized we had something unique. So we reached out to Berner. We're like, "Hey, we don't have the credibility to launch something like this, but we think we have something special here." Berner helped us select those 4 phenos, and we needed a name. And he had it ready. He's like, "Biscotti, man, Biscotti." And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm just not a personal fan of the dry, flavorless cookie. No disrespect to the Italian. It's just to the Italians, it's just like, it sucks all the moisture out of your mouth and it doesn't really taste. It's nice to dip in your espresso or whatever, but I didn't get it. But who was I to say? I'm not the marketing expert. I run the business, build the business behind the scenes. But come to find out, it rhymes really well. And that was a component of how he came up with it. So, he's the master. He was the original OG cannabis marketer. Let him run with it. We paid him a hefty fee to claim that they created it, which in hindsight, it was like, was that the right move, right? We gave the credit of our greatest creation of one of the most legendary strains to have ever hit the market. To this day, it's my understanding that Biscotti has more mentions in music than any other strain, and still is getting mentioned to this day. So I think we made the right move. It's taken, years to continue to clear up, and get the story straight, but it was all worth it.
Was there any other names that were considered internally? And like, how quickly after you heard that name did it pop off? Was it instantly, a couple weeks later? Because like you were saying, there could have been a moment there where you're like, you know what, we're not going with that. Like, we're not sure. We're going to go different direction. Take us through that whole process.
I mean, so I'm the business guy. It was my partner who was heavy on the marketing side, and then of course we were working with Berner. So I'm just the one. You guys tell me what you're going to put in play, and then I'll be behind the scenes making sure it works. I wasn't about to throw any strain names in the ring. It's not my specialty, especially since I was questioning the name Biscotti to begin with, and I'm clearly completely off base with that. Right? Look at the history. So I don't remember at this point that any other names. I mean, Berner had clearly already had it. He had come up with it. He had worked with it. He had put it into, rhymes, whatever it was. And he had such confidence when he delivered it that there wasn't really any discussion beyond that. And, it continued along the line of the Italian dessert from the Cookie Fam guys. So it worked. It didn't roll out as fast as I expected it to, but I'm the impatient, business operations guy. I'm like, come on, guys, we're growing this. We're growing a lot of it. You put something in rotation at the grow, you're making cuts and you're not, bringing it to market for 5 months later. And then everything, it just keeps going. So I'm like, this has got to pick up. It's got to pick up. And, it slowly started. People were trying it out. But when I got a call from our delivery service, this was after it had launched for it was 3 months into the market, give or take. And the delivery service is this is one of the smallest people that we sold to, but he was a cool ass dude, Metro Bloomin'. He's still cranking to this day. He goes, hey, he's getting 3 to 5 pounds at a time. He goes, hey, I need everything you have of Biscotti. I'm like, whoa, dude, you don't just jump from 3 to whatever, 15 to 20. He's like, the Migos, and I was like, the Migos? Yeah, I think I've heard of them. He's like, they're buying everything that they can get, $4K a pop. I'm like, interesting. So I tell my partners, they're like, fuck yes, send him everything. And then that resulted in me getting down there, meeting with them. They put it in the songs and whatnot. It was a surreal experience. And then Biscotti it's taken on a life of its own since then.
So you guys were responsible for kind of doing a lot of the R&D and breeding that led to Biscotti. So that must have kind of hyped your whole R&D team up. Talk about what the next kind of phase in terms of your breeding program. Did you guys just light that thing on fire and just start pouring gasoline on it and running with it? How did that whole thing transpire from the back of the house?
I appreciate the fact that you think we had an R&D team. Our R&D team at that time was one of the growers who spent a lot of time on the forums and knew how to, do the pollen thing. And so, yes, he emerged as our breeder and our R&D team. What we're doing from an R&D perspective today compared to then, you can see how it got there, but R&D's been in our DNA actually since the first time we popped up a grow. I didn't know how to grow. I knew nothing about it. I tapped one of the guys that had been selling to me for years before I opened my dispensary. This is going back to 2000, 2001. I've been buying from this guy. And I was like, hey, are you willing to teach us and give you a piece of the action? Dedicated half of the facility to his technique and half of the facility to R&D. Now, I didn't tell anyone I was dedicating the other half to the R&D. They're like, what the fuck are you doing? We got to make money here. I'm like, I have to try everything that I've seen. We tried every technique, the deep water culture, the giant trees, the rock wool. And ironically, the technique that we use today, we're growing in cocoa, small, medium, small pots. And that's basically exactly what he taught us, with little tweaks and product changes along the way. But that's how it started off. So after we bred Biscotti, we immediately launched into a full Gelato 41 breeding program, and we crossed it to everything that we had that we thought was worthwhile. So the first, beyond Biscotti, and then Gushers. The first breeding program, or the first launch after that, was about, we had about 25 different crosses. And yeah, I mean, now our R&D team of one at that time, and me and my partner, like, looking through stuff and helping pick stuff, that launched Gelinade, Baklava, Area 41. On the alien side, I mean, we're still producing those strains today. So our first breeding program, I don't know, call it luck, a combination of luck and the emergence of our team kind of becoming, hype cannabis tastemakers and really good genetics. I can't deny that Gelato 41 has been one of the best parents in the history of cannabis. And then we have never stopped, and we've never looked back. And to this day, we have over 6,000 unique living plant genetics, unique phenotypes. We have over 150,000 seeds in our seed bank, and our R&D team is spread out to extremely unique and proprietary cultivation techniques that others have taken on into the industry. And we've got some other secrets that haven't even been let out yet. So we're deeply rooted in R&D and the importance of genetics and the complexity of the organization that it takes, and the thoughtfulness it takes to continue to launch hitters.
Is that a deep-rooted understanding of experimentation, looking for different things? Take us for a breeding program. If you're not familiar with it, how does it work, and what are you really looking for in order to know that this is something that has massive potential and this is what we need to do in order to get there?
So our first breeding program, a lot of people, and myself included, historically thought you needed a male and a female. Well, it wasn't that easy to get males. You could buy seeds, but it was always a daunting thing. Like, how do you know what's a good male? Because it doesn't really express that much. But then, the idea of reversing a female and causing hermaphrodism, was kind of getting popularized, and the technique was online. And that's the technique we've largely used for all of our breeding. So, we have an intense pollen donor collection program. We have hundreds of genetic pollen varieties that are kept in a very specific type of storage, and then they're ready to be brushed onto the females at any given time. And so, for a lot of people that don't know, when you reverse a female to force it to have male flowers and subsequent pollen, the almost all of the seeds will be female, which is nice because it cuts your work in half, cuts the space you need in half. It's a much more efficient way to breed. Now, there's a lot of people that make what I think are arguments that have certain validity, that breeding with true males is a whole nother level. But the success that we've had has entirely been based on the reversing of females into males. So you have to have vision. And early on, I want to be very clear, we didn't have a whole lot of vision. We're like, wow, we've got something really good. Let's spray this pollen on everything we got and see what comes out of it. And we had a lot of credibility from a brand perspective at that point. So we could launch a lot of things, and we had the benefit of the doubt from the consumer base. But now it's a totally different landscape. It's insanely competitive. Everyone's breeding, everyone's crossing. There's amazing genetics all over the place. But it's, what do you do with them? How do you pick them out? And then how do you think about the next evolution of what the market might want? Because that takes careful planning. And then when you have thousands of genetic variants in your database, the organization required is intense. So we couldn't, and I make no bones about it, the Connected that got us to the point where we started to develop that breeding program is not the Connected we are today. The old school, the construction guys turned growers, like, myself, figuring out how to grow. We were long past that. We have PhD scientists from Cornell. We have Ian Justice, our SVP of cultivation, formerly from Driscoll's, and their genetics program. It's one of the most advanced genetics program in the world and one of the most successful ones. So they bring their expertise, and then you couple that with both Ted from Alien Labs and myself's understanding of the market. And that's how we're thinking about what pollen do we want, what crosses do we want to make, and then what are we looking for in the phenotypes, or I guess they're supposed to be called chemotypes, I guess. It's very confusing to me still. And that is the combination that is unique and difficult to find. And then you have to have the platform to launch it off of, which we've spent 15 years developing and gaining that consumer credibility that allows us to take chances. And if anyone out there thinks that like, oh, it's that easy, we've put a bunch of stuff out that hasn't been successful, right? But you've got to be willing to take that risk, or else you're in the camp where you're just waiting for all the other people to create something cool, and then you take what they have, but then you don't have anything unique. And then you're in the rat race with the rest of them. We're leading the pack. We're proud to do it, and we'll continue to do it. And there's no end in sight for us.
And then you have to take a name to pair with all of that hard work. And then that's what the consumer is going to then most likely base their purchasing decision and judgment of all of that work on. So like, it's not one person's job. Is it like a group effort? Like, you guys have like a name bank where you're like, this is a good name. If it has these certain characteristics, is it just kind of like custom each time?
It's pretty custom each time. So, it's done similarly between Alien and Connected, but of course I lead the Connected one. So we'll have a naming session, a brainstorming session, and people just throw out, and there's no, it used to be everyone in the room was quiet and I was just throwing out names, and people were like, that's a good one. And that's a good one. I'm like, guys, I don't want to hear that all my names are great. We're not having another one of these meetings where everyone else is quiet. You guys come to the table, throw shit on the wall. We'll see what sticks, right? And then I like to put it into Google. I like to Google it first and foremost to make sure no one else is taking it. But also like what sort of associations come up. Do synonym searches, right? Like try to get really creative and try to find innuendos in some of the names, or just come up with something that sounds cool. Then there's a graphic element that goes along with designing the label. It can be extremely burdensome, but quite frankly, it's also one of the most fun parts of the process.
I can see the origin though from like the first days where you split it 50-50 and to have that mindset right away. Like, we need to experiment, we need to push the envelope. And I think it's so critical, because I think without that early on, you probably wouldn't have gotten here where you're pushing those boundaries and willing to put yourself in positions that are uncomfortable, right? Pushing the line and doing things that are different than everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of people, you look throughout the industry and you'll see, oh, I see they're using that technique from this person or from us, or they learned that, or they're using this genetic, and that's what their whole company's platform is based on. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a model that works, but you're subject to someone else's lunch, right? You're waiting for someone else to finish for you to come over and be like, well, what's he eating, And that's what, and I'm not into that, right? I want to play a part in our own destiny, and that's why we spent so much time. I mean, R&D, I want to be extremely clear, it is one of the most difficult and frustrating and expensive and time-consuming parts of what we do. We spend over $3.5 million a year in R&D and breeding, and you're not expected to monetize that for several years. From what you're working on today, what's on their desk today is not going to be even have a chance at being a commercial product for up to 2-3 years. I mean, you talk about our sativa revival program. We kicked that off 4.5 years ago, and we're just launching stuff out of that program today, where we wanted to commercialize previously admired and appreciated sativa genetics that don't have any sort of modern look and feel that is expected from the consumer today. 4.5 years of patience, of resources, of dedicated space. That space could have been made into just growing Biscotti and making more money. But we are planning for the future. We think we have one of the most extensive genetic databases in cannabis, and the most diversified and the most interesting, right? There might be people that have collected a bunch of stuff, but is it proven? Is it making money anywhere? Is anyone rapping about it, right? And you can say that about a lot of our work.
Is that a really difficult balance of understanding, like, okay, we spent 4 years trying to perfect this, and maybe for you or for Ted, you're like, I'm not feeling this. It doesn't feel like it's hitting up to the type of quality to go behind a connector and nailing. Is that a really difficult balance in understanding that you've allocated the resources, time, and capital for this product and has to fit a specific vision like you guys were thinking?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, Ted, and thank God for him, he has way more patience, right? He is willing to say no at the 11th hour after all the work. And I'm learning that, right? I mentioned in the business, like, well, now I'm the CEO, but I've before, I was like the business ops guy. I didn't have a title. I'm just like, I'm responsible for moving this giant train down the tracks while we're building the tracks. Sometimes I've been guilty of putting stuff out that wasn't ready for prime time and the market responded, right? You know, we've been working on the right OG for quite some time, and we've launched some that just they didn't meet it, right? And the market responded. So Ted has intense patience when it comes to that, and I'm just like chomping at the bit because I like it. I want to see what it's going to do, but sometimes it's not ready, and you got to know when to hold off.
What didn't it have?
So consistent nose. I mean, OG is still to this day one of my favorite, strains and families, right? And it's one of the ones that hasn't, it's one of the very few that hasn't really advanced in terms of when people think of OG and what they expect in that jar, it hasn't changed since it came out in the early 2000s or the late 1990s, right? And so that expectation of putting your head in a bag or a jar or whatever it is and smelling like you just spilled diesel on your hands or 91 premium all over your nice fucking Jordan 1s, right? I mean, that's what it should smell like. And if it doesn't smell like that, you might as well save it for another day. So it's a challenge. Also, OG likes a certain type of treatment in the room. And at the scale we're growing, at the volume we're growing, and the number of strains that we have commercially available at any given time, we don't have the luxury of having one room that has a special treatment, right? Where it's like we're not there. Our rooms are big. We're at mass scale, and so OG is very temperamental. Everyone who's grown it knows it. I mean, you can get really good OG out. Did it yield for shit? No. So it has to have at least a decent yield, and then the smell's got to bang through. So we're really close, and we think actually we're here. We're about to launch Ghost OG, and we're really excited about it. We think it checks all the boxes.
Yeah, I think OG is like one of the first strains when you start working in industry and you open a bag, you can instantly pick OG out of like a dozen different bags just because the nose on it is just so unique compared to every other strain out there. And so when you do something like that, you like launch an OG that's maybe not up to standards or the market just doesn't respond. How do you guys like mitigate the brand associated with the strain, right? Because the strain now is tied to the brands as well. So is it something that you guys pulled off the shelf? Kind of like talk us through that whole process of like taking in the consumer feedback.
Consumer feedback is a super critical component of getting to where we are. Anytime that we've thought, oh, we've got it all, we've made it, we're the best, we can put out anything, we're untouchable. We get that tap on the shoulder and a reminder that that's not the case. You always have to be working. You always have to be willing to listen to the consumer. And we've gotten so much better at that. In fact, nowadays sometimes we have so many unique and interesting phenos from a particular cross. We're putting it into a box and letting the consumer decide between four. We just did that with the Jack box where we had 4 different Jack phenos. And quite frankly, the one that was my favorite didn't win, but the consumers speak and the consumers are what really matters, right? I want my vision to be expressed through the genetics, but I want the consumers to be able to get what they want. And the fact that we're now tapping that is important. But back to your question about OGs or anything, when it doesn't hit, you got to listen. We have our ear to the ground constantly, and we will do whatever it takes to pull it back. Thankfully, the consumer base is extremely loyal and they're extremely forgiving, and they'll understand it and they get it as long as we act quickly and we're responsive to it. We'll either discount it with the retailer, get it out, or straight pull it off the shelf and we move on, right? And we've built that credibility and we're continually appreciative of the consumer loyalty that we continue to receive. And that gives us that buffer, that safe space, because they also want to keep seeing us take chances, right? And if something doesn't hit, they don't drop us forever because they're willing to keep trying because they know for every one that might not hit, we've got 5 coming that are absolute bangers.
Yeah, that's that trust and authenticity that you've already built with the consumer base that knows, okay, they're pushing the line every single time. Let's see how this one is. And it's kind of like exciting for the consumer to try and say, try a new one and be like, will I like this as much as my other one, or will it not be my favorite? And that's kind of an interesting experience that I don't know how many other CPG categories people get that opportunity to have.
Yeah, I mean, cannabis. I've always said, and it comes from a position of not just being in the business, but watching from people come from other industries. Cannabis is unlike any other business, and trust me, I want it to be like other businesses because then there's a playbook, then there's a roadmap, then you bring people in from other industries, and they can, they immediately hit the ground running. It's not like that in cannabis, but the good parts about that is we have the ability to do that. We've got the way the cannabis culture has emerged. The consumer is so deeply embedded in it, and they have such a voice. And the brands have taken made the decision to listen to that voice. And now we're taking it a step further, and we're interacting with that voice. Our QR code program, our phase 1 or top secret on the alien side, is stuff that has made it far enough along in our breeding program where now it's time to see what the consumer thinks. We'll sell and or give away, a few hundred or sometimes a couple thousand jars of something we're thinking about commercializing, see what this feedback is. We get great information, great data. These folks are super honest with us, and that's what we need. I can't get better. I can't give you what you want unless we're willing to listen and you're willing to speak. And what we've built with our sensory, we call it our sensory network. It's a combination of a variety of tastemakers that we work really closely with, and they get to see everything that is on the verge of coming out. And then when it's gone a step further and it's past that group, then this consumer group, it's made up of bud tenders, buyers, and loyal customers. And it's really proven to be beneficial. We see the response, we hear the response. People have a say in what gets launched from their favorite brands. They're influencing that, and the power behind that is unmatched by almost anything else.
It's such a smart concept to get that feedback from the data, especially those early adopters, right, that understand the product. And then when you go to market, you kind of have a sense of more confidence, right? Like, this is going to hit with this type of demographic. Is there a strain recently that you launched, or one that's upcoming that you're super excited about, that you feel really confident is going to hit the market, that people listening about this now should probably look for in the near future?
So Tropical Z is the first Project Sativa Revival strain that came out. It's bright, floral. I say if you go to a bag of Skittles and you take out the orange Skittle only and you chew it, that's what you're going to taste and smell when you smoke Tropical Z. It's that light. Like, I'm at the stage of my life. I've got 3 kids. Weekends are not sit around and chill. That's from the time I get up to the time I go to bed. I'm moving, I'm shaking. And I like to wake and bake. I like to smoke during the day. I can't do that with biscotti and gelato. I love it. I used to be able to do that when I didn't have as much responsibilities. Now that stuff is my nighttime stuff. But I needed the sativa, the daytime, Tropical Z, and then Silver Spoon, which came out right after that, which is a super silver haze hybrid. It's got the modern structure, light purple hues, but it's got that punch you in the face, super silver haze, flavor and smell. And it does the same for you. You can smoke all day long. I'm not going to hit 3 cheeseburgers and 2 naps. I want to do that. I can't do that anymore. I'm not at that phase of my life. And I miss that phase, believe me.
I feel super seen right now.
Right? I mean, everyone feels it. But it's just the reality of where we're at. And so it further speaks, like, what Connected is doing is speaking to the place at where I'm at in my life, where I'm also more open and interested in what everyone else around me is doing. I want to do things a little bit different. I want to tell my story, our story, and that's coming through in the products that we're launching. So Sativa Revival has been a really exciting project to work on, and now we're seeing the fruits of that labor.
What was the kind of the root? Where did that idea originally stem from? Was it 4 years in the making, right? 5 years in the making. Was it just like a conversation where you're like, hey, I wish more of these sativa strains were commercially available? And that's kind of like the root of it. Kind of like, where did Sativa Revival, like, what was the initial spark for the whole idea?
I love that question because it goes all the way back to when I opened Fruit Ridge Health and Wellness 2009. I was
Oh,
bud
wow.
I was bud tending and I was listening to everyone, right? And all these new genetics that were coming through were new to me. I mean, I moved a ton of weight, but it was usually a very narrow number of strains and genetics. So I didn't see all this stuff until I was at the dispensary. And then I would listen to people about why they like certain things. Blue Dream blew up in that time. Jack Herrera went crazy in that time. Super Silver Haze was still having its heyday during that time. That's before essentially what we kind of started in or helped kick off with the gelato, this like purple weed flavor phenom that kind of erupted through the cookies and then the connected program. And after we went through this, crazy, gelato, biscotti, we spent years entrenched in that. I realized I'm like, everyone has forgot about sativas. Like, and they tended to yield good too. And so everyone blew them out too much and no one wanted them anymore. I'm like, that's not right. You don't just bell bottoms don't need to be left in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. You bring that shit back, dude. Make it fashionable again. Use a different fabric, put it on a different model. Come on, that's what we're doing with the sativas. We're breeding them with modern genetics. We're making them a little bit more commercially viable, both in the grow room and in the jar. They look, they smell, they give you the effects that you used to have, but it has a little different form factor that people are used to today, a little bit more digestible, and it makes people more open to dip into that and realize, wow, this puts a big fucking smile on my face. Wow, my kitchen's never been this clean. Wow, I can go and sit through 5 hours of little league games on a fucking Saturday. And that's what sativa does. Sativa's beautiful, cerebral, creative, uplifting. And there's a huge place for that in the market. So it's a long answer to your short question, but like that's all that went into it.
So really, it's 15 years of R&D, not 4.5, right? And early stage consumer feedback, right? Like
R&D is an ongoing evolution.
Not to mention, I do want to touch. I did this little segment with a friend of mine, Olivia from Kush Queen, on sex and sativas. It's like I was noticing a trend, and this is long before, people would choose certain strains before, or at least that I was witnessing, people would choose a strain for a certain activity. A ton of girls were always asking for Blue Dream in specific, but sativas in general. And it was just my over the counter experience. And then one of our former employees, she's like, Blue Dream elevates my sexual experience, like puts me in a place that's extremely difficult for me to get otherwise. And then I started, seeing some of my partners going through my weed jars, and they were always like kind of gravitating towards these sativas. And I'm like, there's something here. And that also triggered, I'm like, we historically have really targeted like this hardcore, male user, 18 to 35, whatever, back in the day when 18 was the legal age, by the way, in California. Still is for medical. And I'm like, the ladies, we can't forget about the ladies. We're growing, all our plants are ladies. We gotta do something for the ladies too. So there's a bit of that in there. It's a nod to my wife. My wife always wants to smoke in the bedroom before any other activity. And she knew, she's from Costa Rica, she knew nothing about sativas. She's like, now I see what you're talking about. Started bringing Jacks in the room, and she's like, I see what you're talking about. I only want that now. Don't bring any of that other purple weed up in here.
I love it. You're like breaking down new lines and experimenting with the different strains to see kind of like what those quote unquote feelings are to people elicit together. So how do you balance again like the brand and for the consumer it is, and then maybe speak to like how you can innovate and try to open up those different pathways where you say, okay, like originally this is the first consumer, but as we evolve, we want to have this consumer for this product. How does that work?
I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to be completely honest, it's an extremely hard thing to do, and it's painful when you start it because people expect a certain thing from you. I mean, I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan and his some of the best advice. I mean, I'm by far not even remotely close to famous or have a lot of comments, but he's like, don't read the comments. When you put some shit out that is not what traditionally was expected from Connected. People, boo, get off the stage. Fuck you. Yes, this is crap. It's hard to read and it's hard to deal with, but you can't put weight behind the haters. You got to go with your heart. You got to believe in what you're doing. And now it's just finally, I think, the market has opened up. We're getting a ton of new consumers either entering or re-entering the space, right? The baby boomers are all coming back. All they ever smoked was sativa. I mean, they didn't know it at the time, but that's pretty much all that was ever available. And so there's a whole new consumer group that is not necessarily influenced by the Prop 215 days, the old school cannabis culture. They want what is right for them. So stepping out of the lane that we were known for driving in, fuck, dude, it was brutal. There's no bones about it. It was really hard. And internally in our company, I got questioned a ton. But, my partner was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. And so you have to be willing to stand up to the naysayers and take a risk. It's what I've done my whole life. Take risks. This is a different kind. All my other risks either involved life or death or potential prison time. This is like a business risk, right? And it's paying off, and the fans are rewarding us for it. But it's fucking hard.
How important do you think brands are in the space moving forward?
It's such an interesting topic right now, and it's in a dynamic one because really there's two main groups, right? There's the groups that believe in brands, and then the groups that believe that they can be recreated and it's not as important, right? And a lot of that second group is made up of some of the MSO groups, and I think time will tell, but I think there's a lot of indicators leaning towards the brand side. First of all, step outside the cannabis space and show me another industry where there's not a significant distinction between the major brand players that are able to command a premium price for a premium product above the rest of the competition. I mean, it's in every CPG category you can point to. So anyone who says brands don't matter, I have a real hard time digesting that. Then you go back into cannabis. The culture emerged out of California. I mean, I don't think anyone can, and it's an argument I don't think a lot of people are willing to listen to. California cannabis culture has driven this entire industry. You can look to every market nationally and internationally and find proof of that all over the world. And so, when you look, I get asked all the time, like I get pictures sent to me from Manhattan, and other spots all over New York. People are like, dude, I didn't know you're in New York. We're like, we're not in New York. But not by any doing of our own. In all those pop-up shots, I've seen numerous different versions of Alien Labs and connected neon signs. So you mean to tell me someone took it upon themselves to open up a store at that expense and that risk and somehow figure out a way to get our products in there, and then you basically counterfeit our logo and take our logo and put it into a sign, and brands don't matter all the way across the country in a place where I've never sold 1 gram of cannabis myself. Like, I don't buy it that brands don't carry the day in cannabis. They might. I could see how in a very short-term view, people might see that brands don't matter. And those are oftentimes people coming from limited license markets where they're selling, weed that no matter what it looks like, smells like, no matter what genetic history, they're selling out, and it's at high prices. I can see how that, from that viewpoint, brands don't matter. I don't buy how you can look into the future, look into any other CPG category in the history that they've gone through, and say that brands don't matter in cannabis or won't matter significantly. That's the bet we've made, clearly.
I think it's so fascinating early on. What I ask my friends when they go into a dispensary for the first time, and most of those people have purchased from like a dealer in the past, they didn't have a different choice, right? They walk into a dispensary now, there's a bunch of different choices. How they make their choice is likely solely based on brand. And that is the first foray into their experiment of like, do I like this product or not? And most of them select packaging, most of them select name, most of them lean on the bud tender who says, hey, this is the most important one. This is the one that's the most popular. And I think those are the areas where your team has continued to deliver. And what you've seen in those New York shops is they went out to California, they figured out which brands are the most popular, and they recognize that your team continues to push the line. And that is what is going to attract consumers into this or to potentially help them buy some product.
Yeah, you touched on a really good point. Like people, okay, so there's a ton of new consumers entering, right? And they may not have never heard of any of the brands. So in that case, they're going to rely on either, the packaging, like you said, or the bud tender. And you don't become a bud tender unless you got a little bit of knowledge, right? You're doing that job. It's a really fun job. It's a really cool job. You get to interact with some of the best personalities. We actually did just this is a little side detour for a second. We did this little kind of experiment where we sat outside of our dispensary and we watched people's expression. We did it for about an hour and a half. And we watched people's body language and expressions and like how they looked coming into the dispensary. And then we documented what they looked like coming out. Almost every time it was a completely different, it was a total different change, a shift. The either straight face or sometimes the frown or the stress turns into a smile, turns into like a pep in their step. They're walking differently. And so being a bud tender is a really cool job, but it also is extremely critical role, right? Because you've got a bunch of new consumers who are trusting you and you there's no school available for you to go to, right? So you have to have done it through experience. So they play one of the most critical roles in the industry. And then so they're going to try every single product, right? But they want to be able to recommend something that is consistent, that's going to be there tomorrow, that's going to be there a year from now, or else they run the risk of losing credibility with their consumer base. And so being a brand that a bud tender feels confident and comfortable recommending is a really big deal. And we spent a lot of time trying to educate the bud tenders, making sure they try all of our new flavors. We're constantly experimenting with new ways to get in front of the bud tenders, to get their feedback, to engage with them, to understand why they choose what they choose or why they recommend the things that they're selling. It's a critical component to brand building, and we've spent years doing it. And the fact that we started in retail gave us that unique lens. I bud tended hundreds and hundreds of hours. I managed the store floor for hundreds, if not thousands of hours, watching the transactions, hearing how it goes. And then that parlayed right into the brand building that we're focused on today.
I think there's also like a macro wave of branding kind of going on through all consumer packaged goods, right? Because like I think the other side of that conversation would be like, oh, well, I don't know the brand of my lettuce, right? Well, nowadays you can go into some stores and it's going to tell you the farm that the lettuce grew at, right? Or even eggs, right? You can go buy specific brands of eggs that are marketing how they make the branding from like a macro perspective is having influence on all of like traditional agricultural products, right? And I think cannabis is just one piece of that like large movement for brands to interact with consumers in terms of all product goods.
You make a super interesting point about the branding of agricultural products. That's a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
But tell me a high-end restaurant that you go into nowadays that doesn't tell you where the lettuce is from, the pork's
Yes.
from, the eggs are from, and it causes a reaction. I live in California, and that's where Connected is based out of, and we're the farm to fork capital of the state, and I think even the country. And so we saw that come up around us here, and so quite frankly, I've drawn from some of that inspiration. Like I want to be known as the absolute best cannabis, not just because it gets you so high or because it's got cool labels, but because people know the story, right? I now know the story of some of those agricultural products because I paid attention to it, and I like the story, and I like the message that they're sending, and I like what they represent. And we are and we will continue to be that brand for cannabis.
I love it. Let's do a quick rapid fire. True or false, construction workers make great growers?
True. Those guys, they get up early, they work hard in some of the most challenging environments. Give them an opportunity to use their hands in an indoor controlled climate environment. I mean, first of all, they're stoked and they'll work their ass off. And instead of having to go pick up a sack on the way home, they're already, it's already plugged in. So it's very true.
Your all-time favorite strain?
ChemD.
The most underrated strain.
Blue Dream.
What does no one know about Caleb?
I collect handmade kitchen knives.
True or false, Taco Bell laid the ground roots for Connected.
That's true. Me and my partner both worked there at age 14.
What is the most expensive lesson you've ever learned?
Wow, not ready for that one. I mean, there's so many of them. I got in a fight in college, and it's on my record, and I've had to explain my way through every single thing since then. That's 2001, and I carry that with me today.
Dream smoking session, 3 people dead or alive.
Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, and Jimi Hendrix.
What question do you wish more people asked you?
What do you do in your spare time?
What do you do in your spare time?
I love to cook, and I love to just chill.
Hard with 3 kids.
It is. I do my best.
Last question, Caleb. Biggest underrated challenge for brands to travel in cannabis?
To travel?
Yeah, how do brands travel in cannabis? The biggest underrated challenge for brands to travel, like from an awareness standpoint, in cannabis.
It's quality assurance, 100%. So you can get your product in front of people, but ensuring that quality across the country, 3,000 miles away, is extremely difficult. Take it from people who have been working at it and are continually working at it today.
I love it. Kellen, you want to take a stab?
What I think the hardest part for a brand to travel is?
Yeah.
I would say consistency, right? I think that growing in Nevada is much different than growing in Florida. And I get that, like, you have environmental controls and HVAC, but like from a business perspective, even if you are able to control the environments, like your HVAC is going to be more expensive, or your dehumidifiers are going to be more expensive in Florida. So you have a completely different operation than you would in, say, Nevada, where it's really dry, right? Curing is going to be affected. So like all of these like little nuances that go into like your SOPs affect, at the end of the day, what the cannabis looks like on the shelf. And if you're not able to mitigate all of those, it's going to be really challenging to have the same bud in Nevada on the shelf and the same bud in Florida on the shelf if they were both grown in these different states under slightly different conditions. So I think that's probably the hardest part of traveling with a brand, is just like, A, having to build out a new facility in every state, and B, having to deal with each state's unique environment that they have. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I think going from small scale to large scale, I think sometimes people underappreciate the challenge there. The plant is extremely challenging to grow in certain conditions, and then you start extrapolating it. Different situations, different locations makes it even more complicated. And I think the marketing aspect is even more challenging, right? I think a lot of people are really familiar with Connected, but maybe they get that first experience in another situation that maybe isn't up to that same quality that Caleb was envisioning. And there's a lot of opportunities out there for failure points. And I think it's really commendable, Caleb, what your team's been able to do, just to continue to push the bar and to push challenges forward and let everyone else come chase you, because not a lot of people, I think, are willing to put themselves on the line and put themselves out on a regular basis. So I definitely tip my hat to you there.
Thanks, guys.
So last question, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
My personal Instagram @counts. I also pay attention to the connected.california Instagram. I don't live, eat, and breathe on social media, so it might take me a minute, but that's where I'm at.
We'll link it on the show notes. Thanks for taking time. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys.